This is the story of Doeg, the watcher who spoke too soon. The lesson of his story is telling the truth without love can destroy more than a lie ever could. Once upon a time, in the highlands of Gibeah, King Saul ruled from his stone palace, powerful, paranoid, and proud. And among the men who served him was a foreigner named Doeg, an Edomite, known for his cunning and quiet observation. He wasn't born into Israel's faith or family, but Saul trusted him more than most of his own. Doeg's title was simple, chief herdsman of the royal flocks, but his real gift was listening. He noticed things others missed, the tone of voices in the hall, the tremble in a servant's hands, the hesitation in a soldier's answer. It made him useful and dangerous. That morning, Saul's palace buzzed with tension. Rumors flew that David, the king's once beloved harpist and warrior, had fled. Doeg sat near the stable, sharpening a small knife used for trimming hooves. His friend Baruch approached, glancing around before speaking. "They say David escaped from the court last night," Baruch whispered. "Saul threw a spear again." Doeg didn't look up. The king throws spears often. The question is, who catches them? Baruch frowned. "You shouldn't joke." Saul's temper's worse than ever. Doeg finally raised his eyes. "And you think fear keeps a man safe?" Before Baruch could answer, a horn sounded from the upper court. Guards hurried past, shouting orders. The steward's voice rang out, "All attendants to the throne room! The king demands an audience!" Baruch froze. "Now what?" Doeg stood, wiping his knife on his sleeve. "Now," he said quietly, "we see who the king trusts." In the great hall, Saul sat slumped on his throne, eyes wild, hair disheveled. The light from the torches flickered across the walls, casting long, restless shadows. "David has betrayed me," Saul muttered, pacing. "He hides like a fox. He plots with the priests. Even my own men whisper his name with affection." The officers stood silent. No one dared speak. Doeg, standing behind the captain of the guard, studied Saul's face. It wasn't the face of a king anymore. It was the face of a man losing grip on his crown. Saul's gaze swept across the room. "Who among you still fears the Lord's anointed? Who among you will help me find this traitor?" No one moved. Doeg's thoughts flickered. He had seen David before, seen the people's love for him, their shouts of praise after every battle. He had seen Saul's face tighten each time someone sang, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." It wasn't just jealousy, it was fear. Saul feared being replaced, and fear, Doeg knew, could make kings desperate. Later that evening, Saul's servants whispered near the fire, "The king trusts no one said. "He sees betrayal in shadows." Doeg said nothing, only stared into the flames. He had always served faithfully, yet he was still an outsider, an Edomite among Israelites. And outsiders survive by knowing when to speak. A messenger entered, breathless. David was seen in Nob, the city of priests. The hall went silent. Saul stood slowly, his eyes burning. "Nob?" he repeated. "Ahimelech dares aid my enemy?" Doeg's pulse quickened. He knew that name, Ahimelech, the high priest. He had once seen him offer bread to travelers in the sanctuary, mercy without hesitation. Saul's voice dropped to a growl. "Find me the one who can confirm it. I'll reward him richly." Doeg said nothing, but he remembered something, a chance encounter days earlier. While tending the king's animals near Nob, he had seen a lone figure arrive at the tabernacle. The man was dusty, hurried, armed with a sword that caught the sun like fire. David! Doeg swallowed hard. He knew exactly what Saul wanted to hear, and he knew what it might cost others if he said it. That night he lay awake in his quarters, staring at the ceiling. Baruch's voice echoed in his mind. "You shouldn't joke, Doeg." Saul's temper's worse than ever. He turned onto his side, whispering into the dark. And yet truth has a price too. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Doeg closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Because he knew that in the morning, when Saul asked again who would tell him the truth, Doeg would be the one to answer. And once he spoke, there would be no turning back. The next morning came with the sound of boots striking stone, soldiers rushing down the palace corridors, voices echoing through the halls. Something had shifted. Saul's paranoia was no longer whispers in the dark. It had turned to full command. Doeg stood among the servants as the king stormed through the courtyard, his cloak dragging behind him, his eyes wild. "Find David!" Saul shouted. "Find the priests who helped him. No man who sides with my enemy will live in peace." The guards bowed, trembling, and scattered like frightened birds. Doeg stayed silent, head lowered. Inside, his mind churned. He had served this man for years, watched him rise from humble beginnings to king of Israel, but this Saul was different. The calm strategist was gone, replaced by something colder and louder, fear in royal robes. Later that day, Saul summoned his closest officers to the throne room. Doeg was there, standing near the back, where servants usually waited unseen. "Listen to me," Saul began, pacing in front of the throne. "David is conspiring with the priests of Nob. He eats their holy bread, takes their swords, and blesses himself in their house of lies." A silence filled the room. Then Saul turned suddenly toward Abner, his general. Why didn't you tell me? You think I don't see what's happening?" Abner lifted his chin. "My lord, I serve you faithfully. I've seen no plot, no betrayal." "Liar!" Saul's voice cracked. "You protect him. All of you protect him." He struck the spear in his hand against the floor, the echo rattling through the hall. "Is there no man left in Israel who will tell me the truth?" Doeg's hands tightened around the strap of his satchel. Every heartbeat felt louder than the last. He could feel eyes on him, waiting. He stepped forward slowly. "My lord," he said carefully, "if truth is what you seek, I will give it." The entire room stilled. Saul turned toward him. "You, Doeg the Edomite, speak." Doeg bowed low. "When I was at Nob, tending your flocks near the priestly city, I saw David. He came to Ahimelech, the high priest. The priest gave him bread, holy bread, and a sword, Goliath's sword. He left armed and well fed." A ripple of gasps filled the room. Saul's eyes blazed. "Ahimelech helped him?" "Yes, my lord," Doeg said, his voice steady though his pulse raced. "He blessed him before he went." Saul's face twisted with fury. "So the priests too have turned against me." He turned to Abner, his voice rising. "Gather every priest from Nob. Bring Ahimelech and his household before me. I will know who stands with me and who dares stand against me." Abner hesitated. "My king, the priests serve the Lord. They are not soldiers in rebellion." "Then they will answer like soldiers," Saul snarled. That night, Doeg couldn't sleep. He sat near the stable fire, staring into the flames. Baruch, his friend, joined him quietly. "You spoke today," Baruch said. You gave Saul what he wanted." "I told the truth," Doeg replied. Baruch's eyes searched his face. But was it the truth that heals, or the truth that kills? Doeg looked away. Truth is truth. What a man does with it is not my burden. Baruch shook his head. You think that's wisdom, but it's only safety. The fire popped, and sparks rose into the dark. Doeg rubbed his hands over his face, trying to shake the unease that had crept into him. You didn't see him, Baruch. You don't know what David means to him. He's unraveling. If I had stayed silent, Saul would have found another reason to rage, maybe against all of us. Baruch's voice was soft. Maybe. Or maybe silence would have saved the innocent. Doeg didn't answer. He didn't want to think about Ahimelech or the priests at Nob. They had been kind men, gentle, devout. But they were also part of a world Doeg had never belonged to. He was an Edomite, always on the edge of Israel's favor. And for once, his truth had made him seen. He stood and tightened his cloak. Better to be trusted by a mad king, he muttered, than forgotten by a just one. The next morning, Saul's army prepared to march. The order had gone out. The priests of Nob were to stand trial before the king. Doeg watched as the soldiers assembled, armor gleaming in the morning light. As they mounted their horses, he caught his reflection in a polished shield, his own face, hard and unreadable. Baruch approached him one last time. When the truth becomes a weapon, he said quietly, someone always bleeds. Doeg looked at him, expression tight. Then let it be the right person. But deep inside, even as the sound of hoofbeats thundered across the valley, a quiet voice whispered something he couldn't ignore. Truth without mercy isn't righteousness. It's judgment in disguise. And that truth, Doeg would soon learn, was far heavier than any sword. The sun hung low over the hills as the wind carried the smell of roasted grain and incense from the city of Nob, the place where the priests of the Lord dwelled, the city of the ephod and the holy bread. From its hilltop, the sanctuary gleamed with quiet peace. But beneath that calm, something was about to stir, something that would change the course of kings and kingdoms. Doeg was there that day, not by plan, but by duty. He had been sent to inspect the king's flocks grazing near Nob. It should have been a simple task, counting animals, checking for sickness. But Doeg's sharp eyes caught more than sheep. He saw movement near the outer gate of the sanctuary. A man in a worn cloak, his pace uneven, his eyes darting back and forth. Doeg narrowed his gaze. The man carried himself like a soldier, but moved like one being hunted. His clothes were dusty, his face unshaven. Then, as a shaft of light broke through the clouds, Doeg saw what hung at his side, a sword wrapped in cloth, its hilt unmistakable. David, the hero of Israel, the king's favorite, turned fugitive. Doeg froze behind the wall of a nearby courtyard, his heart pounding. He'd heard rumors that David fled Saul's rage, but seeing him in person made those whispers real. David knocked on the priest's door. Moments later, Ahimelech, the high priest, appeared. Even from a distance, Doeg could see the priest's surprise. David, son of Jesse, why are you alone? Where are your men? David's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. The king sent me on urgent business. My men are nearby waiting for me. I had no time to gather food or weapons. Doeg's jaw clenched. He's lying. He could hear it in David's tone, see it in his eyes. Yet Ahimelech didn't seem to notice. The priest nodded slowly. "What do you need, my son?" "Bread," David said. "Whatever you have on hand." Ahimelech frowned. "There is no ordinary bread, only the consecrated loaves. But if your men have kept themselves pure, I will give it to you." David answered quickly, "They have. We are clean." Ahimelech went inside and returned moments later with a small bundle wrapped in linen. He handed it to David, smiling kindly. Doeg shifted uneasily behind the wall. The holy bread for a fugitive? But it wasn't over. David glanced around. "Do you have a sword?" "I left mine behind." Ahimelech thought for a moment. "There is one, the sword of Goliath, whom you slew in the valley of Elah. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod." David's expression softened, a mix of pride and pain. "There is none like it. Give it to me." As the priest brought the weapon, the gleam of its blade caught the light and caught Doeg's eyes. The symbol of Israel's triumph now sat in the hands of its most wanted man. David bowed in thanks and hurried away. Ahimelech watched him disappear over the hill, unaware that a pair of eyes had witnessed every word. Doeg remained still long after the gates closed. His mind raced. If Saul knew, if the king heard this. He turned toward the distant hills of Gibeah, where the palace lay like a dark crown on the horizon. Every instinct told him to ride there now, to tell Saul what he'd seen. But another voice, the quieter one, rose in his chest. "Not yet. Wait." That evening, Doeg returned to his camp. The shepherds finished tending the flocks, laughing over small fires, unaware of the weight pressing on their overseer's shoulders. Baruch joined him once again, carrying a wineskin. "You've been gone long," he said. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Doeg stared into the fire. "Maybe I have." David was in Nob today. Baruch's head snapped up. "David? The king's fugitive, you're certain?" "I saw him with my own eyes. He went to Ahimelech, the high priest, took bread and a sword." Baruch's face paled. "Then Saul will kill the priest." Doeg didn't respond. The thought had already burned through his mind like hot iron. Baruch leaned closer. "You mustn't tell him." Doeg looked at him sharply. "You think I can keep this secret? Saul's hunting for him. If I know and say nothing, my silence will look like betrayal." "Better to be silent," Baruch said softly, "than to speak a truth that kills." Doeg exhaled, his breath heavy with conflict. He wanted to believe that. But he'd seen what happened to men who angered Saul, men hung for less. Baruch shook his head and rose. "You forget, Doeg. Truth without wisdom is a sword without a handle." When Baruch left, Doeg remained by the fire, staring into the red embers. He thought of Ahimelech's gentle voice, David's desperate eyes, and Saul's growing madness. Whichever side he chose, someone would fall. He closed his hand around a smooth stone by the fire. His knuckles whitened. "It's not my choice," he murmured to himself. "It's the king's." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Because Doeg, the watcher, the outsider, the man who saw everything, was about to choose for himself, and that choice would stain his soul forever. The next morning, as the flock stirred and the sun crept over the hills, a messenger galloped past Doeg's camp, heading toward Gibeah with news of the fugitive sighting. Doeg watched him disappear into the dust and muttered under his breath, "The truth always travels faster than mercy." But by the time the message reached Saul's ears, it would no longer be just truth. It would be a weapon. By the time Doeg returned to Gibeah, the air in the palace was sharp with tension. Rumors had arrived before he did, carried by a dozen tongues, each retelling the same story with its own venom. David had been seen at Nob. David had conspired with the priest. David had armed himself once again. Doeg entered the palace gates quietly, his boots echoing on the stone floors. He had not been summoned, but he knew it was only a matter of time. The guards at the door shifted uneasily as he passed. Everyone seemed to sense that the king's wrath was close to boiling over. He found Saul in the inner courtyard, pacing beneath a sycamore tree, his spear clutched in one hand. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, searching for betrayal where none could be seen. His servants kept their distance. No one dared approach unless called. When Saul finally looked up, his gaze fixed on Doeg like a hawk on prey. "You," he said, his voice low but cutting. "You were at Nob, were you not?" Doeg bowed slightly. "I was, my lord." Tending the royal herds. Saul stepped closer. "And what did you see?" The silence that followed stretched thin. Doeg's heart thudded in his chest. He could still feel Baruch's warning echoing in his mind. Truth without wisdom is a sword without a handle. But Saul's face was expectant and dangerous. The king's madness had turned truth into currency. Whoever gave him what he wanted would rise. Whoever withheld it would burn. Doeg took a breath. "I saw David, son of Jesse." The courtyard stilled. Saul's grip on his spear tightened until his knuckles went white. "Where?" "At the city of Nob, my lord." He went to Ahimelech the priest. He asked for food and for a weapon. Saul's nostrils flared. "And the priest gave it to him?" "Yes, my lord," Doeg said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "The consecrated bread and the sword of Goliath. He left armed and blessed." For a moment Saul's face went pale. Then the fury came like fire. "So even the priests conspire against me," he shouted. "Even the holy ones betray their king." Doeg kept his head lowered, but his thoughts raced. "Say nothing more," he told himself. "You've given him the truth. Let him do what he will with it." But Saul's next words froze him. "Send for Ahimelech and all the priests of Nob," the king barked. "If they have chosen David over me, they will pay the price." The guards scattered to carry out the command. Doeg remained, rooted to the spot, feeling the weight of what he had unleashed. Saul turned sharply toward him. "You did well to speak, Doeg," he said, his voice calmer now, almost pleased. "You've shown yourself a loyal servant. I will not forget it." He walked away, muttering to himself, but his words were not comfort. They were the quiet tremors before a storm. That night, Doeg sat alone in the servants' quarters, staring at the floor. The walls around him buzzed with rumors. "The priests are being brought before the king," someone whispered. "Even their families are being summoned." Another voice added, "They say Saul has vowed to destroy them all." Doeg's chest tightened. He had known Saul long enough to know this wasn't an empty threat. The king's rage had no boundaries. When Baruch entered, Doeg didn't look up. "You told him," Baruch said softly. "I told him the truth," Doeg replied. "Truth?" Baruch's voice trembled. "You gave him a spark, and he's about to burn a city with it." Doeg's eyes lifted, sharp and defensive. "He's the king. I serve him. If I had stayed silent, he would have accused me of treason." Baruch shook his head. And now you'll watch him turn against the priests, men who have never lifted a weapon against him. You think loyalty will protect you from his madness?" Doeg slammed his hand on the table. "What would you have me do, Baruch? Defy him? Speak mercy to a man who can't even hear reason?" Baruch's expression softened, almost pitying. "No, I'd have you remember that every man who feeds a fire eventually gets burned." Doeg turned away. "Leave me." Baruch hesitated, then left the room without another word. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Doeg pressed his hands to his face, his thoughts unraveling. He could still see Ahimelech's gentle eyes, the way he'd blessed David without hesitation. He remembered the priest's kindness, his lack of fear. And soon that same man would stand before Saul because of him. The next morning, the horn sounded again through the palace, a long, low call that meant judgment was coming. Doeg followed the guards into the throne room. The priests of Nob stood in chains, pale and trembling, surrounded by soldiers. Ahimelech was among them, his head high despite his fear. Saul's gaze was like ice. "Ahimelech," he said slowly, "why have you conspired with my enemy? You gave bread and a sword to the traitor David." Ahimelech bowed. "My lord, I knew nothing of rebellion. David has always been your loyal servant. I thought I was helping your son-in-law." Saul's expression twisted. "Lies!" he shouted. "You served him, not me. You gave him strength to flee." He turned to the guards. "Kill them! All of them!" The soldiers froze. Not one moved. Abner, the commander, stepped forward. "My king, we cannot harm the priests of the Lord." Saul's voice dropped, cold and furious. "Then I will find someone who will." His eyes fell on Doeg. "Doeg the Edomite," he said slowly. "You heard my command." The words hung heavy in the air. Doeg's blood ran cold. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Saul stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You brought me the truth, Doeg. Now finish what you started." The room fell silent. The priest's eyes turned toward him, not in hatred, but in quiet horror. Ahimelech's voice broke through the stillness. "My son," he said softly, "remember that truth without mercy is no truth at all." Doeg's breath caught. His hand trembled. He wanted to run, but Saul's stare held him fast. In that instant, Doeg realized there was no way back. He had spoken a truth that became a sword, and now he was being told to wield it. The air inside Saul's court grew so still that every heartbeat felt deafening. The guards looked to the floor, their hands frozen on the hilts of their swords. No one dared move. Doeg stood in the center, caught between two commands. The unspoken one in his soul that screamed, "Don't do it," and the king's voice that demanded obedience. Saul's words broke the silence like a crack of thunder. "Doeg, turn and strike the priests of the Lord." Doeg's throat went dry. He looked at the line of men before him, white robes, trembling hands, faces turned toward heaven. Ahimelech stood at the front, calm despite the terror around him. The old priest's lips moved in quiet prayer. Doeg's voice barely came out. "My lord, these men have served you. They've served the Lord. They mean no harm." Saul's eyes flared. "Do you dare question me?" His spear lifted, its point hovering inches from Doeg's chest. You spoke of David's betrayal, and now you hesitate to act. Obey Doeg, or die with them." The weight of those words crushed every thought in Doeg's mind. His heart pounded. The priests knelt now, whispering prayers. Their voices blended into a haunting chorus, not of rebellion, but of surrender. Doeg's hand shook as he drew his sword. For a single moment, the world went quiet. Then steel met flesh. The first cry echoed through the hall, piercing and brief, then another and another. When it was done, silence returned. But it wasn't peace. It was the hollow quiet of judgment. The smell of blood and incense mingled in the air. Doeg stumbled backward, staring at what he'd done. The sanctuary servants lay motionless, robes soaked crimson. The holy city of Nob, a place once known for worship, had become a grave. Saul stood watching, eyes cold and unblinking. He turned away, satisfied. "Burn the city. Leave nothing standing." The soldiers obeyed this time. Doeg dropped his sword, his breath ragged. His hands shook violently, every image seared into his mind, the priests' faces, the sound of their final prayers, Ahimelech's last words. Truth without mercy is no truth at all. He sank to his knees as the fires began to rise outside. Baruch's voice echoed in his memory. Every man who feeds a fire eventually gets burned. Hours later, Doeg stood on the hillside overlooking Nob. The city blazed in the distance, orange flames devouring wood, stone, and scroll alike. The cries of the dying faded into the wind. He had followed orders. He had told the truth. He had done what was right in the eyes of the king. And yet, every part of him felt cursed. As the flames danced on the horizon, he whispered, "What have I done?" He thought of David, the man who once calmed Saul's madness with music, now hunted like a beast. He thought of Ahimelech's calm voice, of Saul's trembling rage, and of himself, the man who had spoken one sentence too many. When a soldier passed behind him, Doeg quickly straightened his shoulders and wiped his face. "The king will want a report," the soldier said. Doeg nodded, his voice hollow. "Tell him the truth has been silenced." The man frowned. "What truth?" Doeg turned toward the fire, his eyes reflecting the blaze. "The kind that cannot be spoken anymore." The soldier left him alone, uneasy. Doeg remained there until dawn, his clothes stained with ash and guilt. The fire had done its work. The priests were gone. The city of God's servants had fallen, but something deep inside Doeg had burned with it, something that would never be rebuilt. And far away, in a cave beyond Saul's reach, David would soon hear what had happened. His heart would break, and his pen would write words that would haunt Doeg forever. "Why do you boast of evil, O mighty man? The steadfast love of God endures all day long." Psalm 52, a psalm that would immortalize the watcher who spoke too soon. Doeg closed his eyes, and for the first time in years he felt afraid to pray. Because deep down he knew even silence could not save him now. Doeg returned to Gibeah under a veil of smoke. The road behind him still carried the scent of burning wood and death. Every hoofbeat of his horse seemed to echo with the sound of falling voices, the priests of Nob crying out their final prayers as the fire consumed their city. The palace stood dark against the morning sky. Servants moved quietly, avoiding the king's eyes. Rumors had already spread. Saul's wrath had reached the house of God. No one dared speak of it aloud, but the whispers traveled like ghosts. Doeg dismounted and handed his reins to a stable boy, who recoiled at the sight of his blood-stained tunic. He wanted to wash it, to tear it off, to forget, but he could still feel Saul's eyes burning in his memory, his voice commanding, "Obey or die with them." Inside, Saul sat on his throne, the firelight flickering over his hollow face. The madness in his eyes had quieted, for now. He looked almost calm. When Doeg entered, the king leaned forward, his tone disturbingly gentle. "It is done?" Saul asked. Doeg bowed low, his voice steady but thin. "It is, my lord. The city of Nob is no more." Saul nodded slowly, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "You have served your king well. The Lord's favor is with those who protect his anointed." Doeg's stomach twisted. "The Lord's favor?" The word sounded like mockery. Saul's eyes narrowed. "You look uneasy, Doeg." Doeg hesitated. "It was a heavy task, my king. They were priests, men of God." Saul slammed his hand on the arm of his throne. "Men of deceit. They fed my enemy, they armed him, they blessed his rebellion. Would you have me let them live?" Doeg dropped to one knee, bowing deeply. "No, my lord. I only meant—" "Enough," Saul interrupted, his tone softening again. "You did what others would not. You obeyed. You have proven your loyalty." He motioned to a servant. "Bring him wine. Let the one who honors his king drink and be glad." The goblet trembled in Doeg's hand as he lifted it to his lips. The wine tasted like ash. He forced himself to swallow. Saul leaned closer. "Doeg, you are not like the rest. You understand what loyalty means. You see things clearly. That is why I need men like you." The words should have felt like praise. Instead, they felt like chains. That night, Saul slept soundly for the first time in weeks. But Doeg did not. He wandered outside the palace walls, down the quiet road that led toward the hills. The night was cool, the stars hidden behind drifting clouds. His steps carried him to a small spring, a place where shepherds often came to water their flocks. The sound of the water was soft, but in his mind, every drop became a memory. He knelt and plunged his hands into the stream. The water ran red for a moment, washing away the last traces of blood from his fingers. He stared at his reflection. His own eyes looked foreign, hollow, rimmed with shadows. Baruch found him there before dawn. "Doeg," he said quietly, approaching with careful steps. "I heard what happened." Doeg didn't look up. "Then you've heard more than you should. I heard you were the only one who obeyed." Doeg's voice cracked. "Obeyed?" He gave a bitter laugh. "Is that what they're calling it?" Baruch sat beside him. "You followed orders. You saved your life." "I destroyed theirs," Doeg said. His hands shook. "I thought obedience would bring me peace, but it only made me see how empty loyalty can be." Baruch was silent. Then he said, "The king's reward will fade, Doeg. But what will you tell the Lord when you stand before him?" Doeg's head fell. "That I told the truth, that I obeyed." "And he will ask," Baruch replied softly, "whose voice did you obey? Mine or man's?" Doeg clenched his fists. "You think I wanted this?" he snapped. "You think I wanted to be the one? I tried to warn him, tried to hold back, but Saul looked at me like death itself. If I disobeyed, I'd be among the dead too. Baruch met his eyes. Then better to die clean than live cursed. Doeg stood abruptly. Easy words for a man who wasn't there. He turned away, his voice low. You didn't see their faces. Baruch watched him go, shaking his head. No, he whispered, but I see yours now. In the days that followed, Saul's court returned to its usual rhythm, banquets, patrols, decrees. But something unseen had shifted. Servants crossed themselves when Doeg passed. Soldiers whispered when his name was spoken. They called him the King's Blade. He tried to ignore them, to lose himself in work, but each night when the halls emptied and the torches burned low, he heard the echoes, the cries of the priest, the crackle of burning wood, the silence after the last voice fell. And sometimes, in his sleep, he saw Ahimelech standing before him, calm and steady, saying only one thing. You were never asked to be cruel. Doeg would wake in a cold sweat, gripping the edge of his bed. The guilt pressed heavier with each passing day. One evening, as he walked past the inner court, he overheard two guards speaking near the gate. Did you hear? One whispered. A survivor escaped from Nob, a young priest named Abiathar. The other gasped. Escaped? Where? They say he fled to David. He told him everything. Doeg's heart stopped. A survivor. He turned sharply and walked away before they noticed him. His mind raced. If David knew, if word spread, Saul would not see this as unfinished business. He would see it as betrayal. Doeg didn't sleep that night. He walked the length of the palace until the torches burned out, and then stood on the balcony, staring into the distance where Nob once stood. The horizon was dark, but he could almost see the faint orange glow of memory. He whispered to the wind, You can kill a man. You can burn a city, but you can't kill the truth. And somewhere, deep inside, he knew that the truth he had spoken, the one that began all this, was now the same truth that would destroy him. The wind howled outside Gibeah, carrying with it the last scent of smoke from Nob. The city's ashes had long cooled, but in Doeg's heart the fire burned hotter than ever. He had obeyed Saul, silenced the priests, and done everything a loyal servant was supposed to do, yet peace never came. At night, he dreamed of voices. In those dreams, Ahimelech's calm eyes stared at him through the flames, whispering words Doeg couldn't silence. Truth without mercy is no truth at all. He would wake drenched in sweat, trembling, his chest heaving as though he'd been running from judgment itself. By day, the palace grew heavier with whispers. Servants spoke in hushed tones. Even soldiers who once saluted him with respect now lowered their eyes as he passed. The silence that followed him was louder than any accusation. Then came the day that changed everything. Doeg had been called to the court again. He expected another errand, another dark command, but when he arrived, Saul was not alone. The prophet Gad had come, his expression grim. And behind him, a messenger from the wilderness knelt before the throne. Saul's face was a mask of fury. You, he growled at the messenger, say it again. The man swallowed hard. My lord, David has taken refuge in the strongholds of Judah. The priests of the Lord bless him still. One of them, Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, escaped. Doeg felt his stomach drop. Saul turned his eyes on him, cold, accusing, almost gleeful. Your truth was incomplete, Doeg. Doeg's voice was faint. My king, I told all I knew. No one could have... Silence, Saul bellowed. You left one alive. the son of the priest. He fled to David, and now the traitor has his own priest to counsel him. Your obedience was worthless." Doeg fell to his knees. "My lord, I obeyed your word. I burned the city. I dash." But Saul was no longer listening. He turned to Gad. "See how God punishes me. Even when I purge the land of treachery, rebellion grows like weeds." The prophet's eyes softened with sorrow. "The Lord does not bless a man who kills his servants, Saul. You have brought judgment upon yourself." Saul's face twisted. "And what of him?" He pointed at Doeg. "Was it not his hand that carried out the deed?" Ged's gaze turned toward Doeg, piercing and mournful. "He did as you commanded. Yet blood obeyed in fear does not wash away guilt, it multiplies it." Doeg felt the weight of those words like chains tightening around his soul. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but every word died in his throat. Saul dismissed them all with a wave of his hand. "Leave me." As Doeg rose, Gad stepped close enough for only him to hear. "The blood of Nob cries out from the ground, Doeg, and the Lord hears every cry." Doeg with his eyes, haunted. "Then he must hate me." Gad shook his head. "No, but you will not escape what you have sown." That night, Doeg could not remain in the palace. He wandered the outskirts of Gibeah until the stars blurred above him. He found himself on a ridge overlooking the valley, where the wind carried faint echoes from the past, the laughter of priests, the songs of prayer. They weren't real, but to Doeg they felt alive. He fell to his knees, gripping the earth. "I only obeyed!" he shouted into the dark. "I only told the truth!" But the night had no mercy. When dawn came, a rider from the south arrived at the palace. He bore a parchment sealed with wax. Doeg stood nearby when the message was read aloud before Saul's court. "A psalm of David, son of Jesse." The court grew still as the messenger read, "Why do you boast of evil, O mighty man? The steadfast love of God endures all day long. Your tongue plots destruction like a sharp razor, you worker of deceit." Doeg's knees weakened, his face drained of color. The words went on, "You love evil more than good, and lying more than speaking what is right. But God will break you down forever. He will snatch and tear you from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living." The hall was silent when the messenger finished. Saul smirked. "The shepherd boy sings songs now? Let him sing from his cave." But Doeg could not move. Every word felt like a blade slicing through the last defenses of his conscience. He saw the faces again, Ahimelech, the priests, the burning city. He felt their blood on his hands. When the court emptied, Doeg remained behind. He walked to the edge of the courtyard and stared out toward the wilderness. Somewhere beyond those hills, David still lived, and his words now lived louder than any sword. Baruch approached quietly. "You heard it," he said. Doeg nodded. "He's named me without naming me." Baruch studied him. "Then the Lord has given you a mirror. You can still turn away." Doeg laughed bitterly. "Turn away? I've already been turned out. There's no undoing what's done." "Maybe not," Baruch said. "But repentance begins where excuses end." Doeg looked at him, eyes hollow. "And where would a man like me begin?" Baruch stepped closer. "At the same place you ended it, on your knees." That night, Doeg did kneel. Alone in his quarters, he whispered words he hadn't said in years. God of Israel, I don't know if you hear me. I don't know if you forgive men like me, but if you still listen, let my truth finally be mercy. No answer came, only silence. But somewhere beyond that silence, he thought he felt something move, like the faintest breath of wind, carrying with it the distant sound of a psalm still echoing through the wilderness. And for the first time since Nob burned, Doeg wept. Weeks passed, but for Doeg, time moved like a slow shadow. The king's favor, which once seemed like a crown, had become a weight around his neck. Saul was quieter now, almost too quiet. The wild rages that once shook the palace had settled into something colder, an emptiness that filled the air like fog. And through that fog, Doeg moved carefully, every word measured, every step deliberate. The morning of the ceremony arrived with the sound of horns echoing through the palace corridors. Saul had declared a day of recognition, a public show of strength. His commanders were to be honored, his servants praised. The people of Israel were to be reminded that their king was in control. Doeg dressed in silence, fastening the clasp of his cloak with trembling fingers. He knew what was coming. In the great hall, soldiers lined the marble floor in 2 long rows. Courtiers whispered behind jeweled veils, and the air smelled faintly of incense and sweat. At the far end of the hall, Saul sat high upon his throne, his crown gleaming under the torchlight. His gaze was fixed forward, but it carried a strange emptiness, as though his eyes looked past everyone present and into some distant terror only he could see. When Doeg entered, the crowd stirred. Some looked away, unwilling to meet his eyes. Others glared, their hatred thinly veiled behind forced smiles. His name had become a whisper in the kingdom, spoken with either fear or disgust. He could feel their judgment pressing against his skin as he approached the dais. Saul's voice filled the chamber. There are men among us who have shown courage when others trembled, men who have obeyed when others questioned. Today we honor one such man. He extended his hand toward Doeg, Doeg the Edomite. The hall fell silent. Even the torches seemed to flicker lower, their flames uncertain. Doeg stepped forward, his boots echoing across the floor. He bowed deeply, the movement mechanical, rehearsed. Saul descended the steps slowly, placing a hand on Doeg's shoulder. His grip was heavy, almost possessive. "This man," Saul said, his voice carrying through the hall, "stood firm when others hid behind false holiness. He defended his king. He cut down those who conspired with traitors. While others cowered before the priest of Nob, Doeg obeyed." A few soldiers clapped hesitantly, unsure if they were applauding bravery or murder. The sound was scattered, hollow. Saul smiled faintly, eyes gleaming. Loyalty, such as this, deserves reward. He motioned to a servant who stepped forward carrying a gold chain. Saul placed it around Doeg's neck, the metal cold against his skin. "From this day, you are not merely the keeper of my flocks," Saul continued. "You are a counselor to the crown." The hall erupted in forced cheers. Trumpets blared. But the sound struck Doeg like thunder against stone, loud, empty, meaningless. He bowed again, but his hands were trembling. When the ceremony ended, Saul leaned in close and whispered so that only Doeg could hear. "Do not think I've forgotten, my friend. You've seen what others haven't. You've done what others wouldn't. I need men like you." Doeg forced a nod. "Always, my lord." But Saul's next words cut through the noise of the hall. And yet, Men like you, those who know too much, must remember their place. The smile faded from Doeg's lips. My place, my king, is at your command. Saul's eyes lingered on him for a moment, unreadable. Then the king turned away, his cloak sweeping the floor like a shadow. That night, Doeg stood at the edge of the balcony outside his new chambers, the golden chain still heavy on his neck. The wind brushed against his face, cool and sharp. Below him, the city of Gibeah slept in uneasy silence. He should have felt proud. He should have felt victorious. Instead, his stomach churned. He could still smell the smoke of Nob. He could still hear the psalm being read in the court, the one that branded him forever in David's song. From behind him came the sound of footsteps. Baruch entered quietly, holding a small scroll. They're already singing it in the markets, he said softly. David's psalm. It's spreading faster than the king's decrees. Doeg didn't turn. Let them sing. Baruch hesitated. You don't understand. He named you Doeg, not in words, but in truth. The people whisper. They say, God will strike down the man who spilled the priest's blood. You're becoming a curse among them. Doeg's hands gripped the railing. Then let me be their curse, he said bitterly. Let them remember my name if it makes them fear rebellion. Baruch stepped closer. And what of your own fear? Doeg turned slowly, his expression hard. Fear is a luxury for the innocent. Baruch shook his head. You can wear gold, Doeg, but it won't hide the blood. You think you're free because Saul rewards you, but you're his prisoner. You've chained yourself with obedience. Doeg looked down at the chain around his neck. It glimmered faintly in the moonlight, beautiful and suffocating all at once. Perhaps, he said, but at least I know my cell. Baruch's voice broke. Then you've lost more than your soul. You've lost your freedom to repent. He turned and left without another word. Doeg stood alone on the balcony until the night deepened. His heart was heavy, his mind loud with memories he couldn't silence. The gold around his neck felt like the white of 1,000 prayers he had silenced. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, low and distant. It wasn't rain. It was a warning. And though Doeg tried to dismiss it, deep inside he knew the king's approval was not a shield, it was the sound of a closing trap. The palace had grown colder in the weeks that followed. The fire in Saul's heart, once furious and blazing, had become a dying ember, yet even embers can burn those who stray too near. Fear ruled every hall, every whispered conversation. Servants spoke only when necessary, and soldiers obeyed commands without question, their loyalty born not of love but of terror. Doeg lived among them like a ghost wrapped in gold. His position had risen, his chamber was larger, and his meals richer, but peace had fled him. Each morning he awoke drenched in sweat, hearing faint echoes of screams that had long ceased. Each night he dreamed of Ahimelech's final prayer, his calm eyes lifted toward heaven as the sword fell. One afternoon, as the palace baked under the heavy sun, a message arrived at the gates. The guards hesitated before delivering it, for it was sealed with the mark of a prophet. When Saul received it, he tore it open and read only a few lines before his face twisted in rage. He threw the parchment to the floor. Another one, he muttered. Another prophet dares to speak against me. Who sent it, my lord? One of his captains asked. Samuel's followers, Saul spat. They claim to speak of judgment for Nob. The room grew still. Even the soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Saul's gaze drifted toward Doeg, who stood silently near the throne. "You see, Doeg," he said with an unsettling grin, "the prophets think they can frighten me with words. But words don't rule kingdoms. Steel does." Doeg bowed slightly. "Yes, my lord." But deep inside, his chest tightened. He knew that tone in Saul's voice, the same cold confidence that had burned the city of priests to ash. Saul turned to him. "Go. Bring me this prophet. His name is Azarel, son of Hananiah. They say he preaches outside Gibeah, warning the people that God's wrath is near. Bring him before me." Doeg hesitated, then nodded. "As you wish." He found the prophet near the edge of the city, standing beneath a cluster of olive trees, speaking to a small crowd. His voice was steady and calm, but every word struck like thunder. "Men of Israel," Azarel cried, "how long will you fear the wrath of kings more than the justice of the Lord? The blood of Nob cries from the ground. The Lord has weighed Saul and his house, and they are found wanting." The people listened in uneasy silence. Some turned away. Others wept quietly. Doeg stood at a distance, cloaked and unseen, watching. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, but he did not move. He could not. Azarel's eyes suddenly lifted and found him through the crowd. "And there," the prophet said, pointing, "stands the hand that carried out the king's rage." Gasps rippled through the people. Doeg's stomach dropped. He had not revealed himself, yet somehow the prophet knew. Azarel's voice grew quiet, almost sorrowful. "Doeg the Edomite, the watcher who saw and did not weep, the servant who spoke truth but killed mercy. You thought you obeyed a king, but you disobeyed God." Doeg stepped forward, his cloak falling from his shoulders. "You speak as if you know my heart," he said, his voice trembling but loud enough for all to hear. "You think I wanted this? You think I asked for his madness?" Azarel's expression didn't change. "You wanted favor. You wanted a place among Israel's chosen, but you sought it through blood." Doeg's jaw tightened. "And what would you have done, prophet? Stand silent and be slain beside them?" "I would have feared the Lord more than the wrath of man," Azarel replied softly. The words hit Doeg harder than any blade. He opened his mouth to speak, but no defense would come. The prophet stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You cannot undo what has been done, Doeg. But repentance is still open to the living. Turn before the Lord turns his face from you forever." Doeg stared at him, searching his eyes for judgment, but all he saw was sorrow. "Your hands," Azarel whispered, "are stained with the blood of servants. But your soul is still waiting to be claimed." Then the prophet turned and walked away, the crowd parting for him in silence. Doeg didn't move for a long time. The sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the ground. The words echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. Your soul is still waiting to be claimed. When he returned to the palace, Saul was pacing in the courtyard. "Did you bring him?" the king demanded. "No, my lord," Doeg said quietly. "He spoke against you, but I did not strike him." Saul's head snapped up. "You disobeyed me?" Doeg with his gaze. "He was unarmed. His words are wind. Killing him would only make them spread." Saul's expression twisted, half fury, half fear. "Careful, Doeg. I've seen men begin with pity and end with betrayal." Doeg bowed low. "I remain your servant, my king." But as he left the court that night, he knew it was a lie. For the first time in years, Doeg felt something move in his heart, something painful and alive. It wasn't loyalty, it wasn't fear, it was remorse. He walked alone until he reached the hill that overlooked Nob's ashes. The wind there was cold and sharp, carrying the faint scent of dust and smoke. He knelt on the ground where the city once stood and whispered, "Lord, if you still see me, if you still listen, tell me what to do." There was no voice from heaven, no sign in the sky, only a long silence and the soft rustle of the wind through dead grass. But Doeg understood. Silence was its own answer. And for the first time, he bowed his head, not to Saul, not to power, but to the God he had long ignored. The years had been cruel to Doeg. Though the crown of Saul still glittered under the sun, its brilliance was fading, its weight growing heavier. The king's paranoia had deepened, his temper sharper than ever, and the people who once loved him now whispered prayers of endurance rather than loyalty. Within those darkened palace walls, Saul's servants had learned the art of silence, and none had mastered it better than Doeg. He had risen higher than most, yet he had never felt lower. His eyes had seen too much. His hands, once proud to serve, trembled when he washed them. He had gained gold, land, and a seat at the king's table, but lost sleep, peace, and the quiet conviction that once guided him. He was a man of two worlds, one bound to Saul's throne, the other haunted by the blood that stained his memory. Every night, when the torches dimmed and the halls fell silent, he would walk alone through the corridors, tracing the cracks in the walls with his fingertips as though they were a map of his own soul. Sometimes he thought he heard voices, the faint sound of priests praying in the distance, the muffled laughter of the innocent before the flames took them. He told himself it was imagination, but the sound always followed him, like shadows that refused to obey the light. That morning, the summons came. Saul wanted him at once. Doeg dressed carefully, tightening his cloak, adjusting the chain that still hung around his neck. He had tried many times to remove it, but something in him could never quite do it. It was more than gold. It was a reminder of who he had become, a mark of favor that felt more like a curse. When he entered the throne room, he found Saul pacing, muttering to himself. His once powerful frame seemed smaller now, as if madness had eaten away at his strength. "You're late," Saul snapped without looking up. "My apologies, my king," Doeg said, bowing. Saul turned to face him, eyes wild. "David is still alive. He moves through the wilderness, protected by those who defy me. How does he still live, Doeg? How does the traitor breathe when my servants swear they are loyal?" Doeg hesitated. He had learned that honesty was dangerous in this room. "He hides well, my lord." The people of Judah shield him. They say the Lord is with him. "The Lord," Saul's voice cracked into a bitter laugh. "The Lord has left me." He hides behind that shepherd boy now. He stopped suddenly and gripped the arm of his throne. "Doeg, you served me once without hesitation. You brought me truth when others lied. Do you still serve me?" Doeg with his eyes. There was a time when that question would have filled him with pride. Now it filled him with dread. "I serve my king," he said carefully. Saul studied him. "They say you wander at night, that you speak to prophets, that you seek mercy." His tone dripped with contempt. "Mercy is for the weak." Doeg's breath caught. "And what is strength, my king?" "Killing the innocent, burning priests to ash." The room went silent. Saul stared at him, disbelief flashing across his face. No one had spoken to him like that in years. "Watch your tongue," Saul warned. Doeg straightened his back, his voice steady now. "You once feared God more than men, Saul. But now you fear shadows, songs, and the ghost of a shepherd boy. You've made enemies of your friends, and friends of your fears." Saul's hand tightened around his spear. "You forget your place." Doeg's gaze didn't waver. "No," he said quietly. "I've only just found it." That night, Doeg left the palace again. He didn't look back. He rode alone through the dark fields that stretched beyond Gibeah, the moonlight guiding him toward the hills. The air was cold, the sky low and heavy. He passed empty vineyards, broken fences, and abandoned watchtowers, the bones of a kingdom that was slowly dying under the weight of its own pride. When he finally reached the ruins of Nob, he dismounted. The city was silent, reduced to gray ash and scattered stones. The scent of smoke had long since faded, but the memory of it hung in the air. He knelt among the ruins, tracing the charred outlines of what had once been walls, homes, and altars. He whispered, "I was only doing my duty. I thought obedience would save me. But obedience without righteousness, it only destroys." He closed his eyes and could almost see the past. The priests walking the courtyards, the sound of psalms rising from their lips, the gentle laughter of children playing near the temple steps. Then came the memory of fire, the screaming, the silence. Doeg's hands trembled. "Ahimelech," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I see your face every night. I hear your words. Truth without mercy is no truth at all. You were right, and I was blind." He bowed his head to the ground. "If you hear me, Lord," he prayed softly, "do not take vengeance on me. Take pity. I have spoken truth as a weapon. I have served a king who feared you less than his own reflection. I have killed in the name of loyalty. I have forgotten what it means to love justice. But if there is mercy left for the wicked, let it find me now." The wind stirred through the ruins, gentle and cold. For a moment, it seemed to Doeg that the ashes shifted, like unseen hands brushing over the earth. A faint sound carried on the breeze, something like the hum of a psalm long forgotten. He could not tell if it was real or only in his mind, but it filled him with a sorrow so deep it felt like drowning. He stayed there for hours, unmoving until the stars blurred and dawn began to break. The light touched the ground softly, revealing the blackened stones glinting faintly like embers. From the road behind him came the sound of hooves. Baruch rode up, breathless, his eyes wide with concern. "Doeg! The king has gone mad. He's calling for your arrest. He says you've turned against him." Doeg rose slowly, brushing dust from his hands. "Then it's finished," he said quietly. "Even Saul's madness must find an end." Baruch dismounted. "You have to run. David is in the wilderness of Ziph. They say he shelters those fleeing Saul's wrath. You can still live." Doeg smiled faintly, a sad curve of his lips. "Live? I've been dying since Nob burned." "Then live differently," Baruch pleaded. "Don't let that be your last word. Let repentance be." Doeg looked past him, toward the hills shimmering under the sunrise. He could almost see the light falling on David's hidden camps, hear the songs rising from caves where the fugitive still praised the God who had never abandoned him. "I am not worthy of his company," Doeg said. "He sings of mercy, and I have only sown grief." Baruch stepped closer. "And yet mercy is not earned. It's given. For a moment, the two men stood in silence. Then Doeg placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You've been my conscience when I had none," he said softly. "If you ever see David, tell him I no longer boast in evil." Baruch's throat tightened. "Where will you go?" Doeg turned toward the hills, his cloak fluttering in the cold wind. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere God can hear me without Saul's voice between us." He began to walk away, his figure small against the growing light. Baruch called after him, but Doeg didn't turn back. The sound of his footsteps faded into the morning, leaving only the whisper of the wind among the ruins. He wandered for days, moving from village to village, sleeping beneath the stars. People recognized him sometimes, whispered his name, spat at his feet, but he never answered. He carried no weapon now, only silence. The longer he walked, the lighter he felt, as though each mile burned away a layer of guilt he had carried for too long. One evening, as the sun sank over the horizon, he came upon a shepherd tending a small flock near the edge of the wilderness. The man was young, kind-eyed, and unaware of who stood before him. He offered Doeg a piece of bread and a place to rest by his fire. They spoke little. The shepherd hummed softly to himself, a tune that Doeg recognized, the same melody the priest once sang in Nob. He listened in stillness, letting the sound wash over him. When the song ended, the shepherd looked up. "You seem burdened, traveler." Doeg managed a faint smile. "I once thought truth would save me. I was wrong. It can destroy too." The shepherd nodded thoughtfully. "Truth without love is like a blade without a sheath. It cuts everything it touches." Doeg stared at the fire, his eyes wet. "Yes, I know that now." He looked toward the horizon, where the last light of day lingered like hope refusing to die. "I've served kings," he said quietly, "but tonight I serve no one. Maybe that's the beginning of peace." The shepherd said nothing more. They sat in silence as the stars filled the sky, and Doeg felt for the first time in years something stirring deep within him, not pride, not fear, but the faint trembling warmth of grace. Weeks later, travelers passing through the valley spoke of finding a man's cloak near the ruins of Nob, worn, faded, and weighed down by a melted chain of gold. No one knew what had become of him. Some said he wandered east and lived the rest of his days in quiet repentance. Others whispered that he died praying among the ashes he once helped create. But those who knew the Psalms said that David's song lived on longer than any rumor. And in the words of that song, they found the warning and the hope that Doeg's life left behind. "The righteous shall see and fear, and shall laugh at him, saying, 'See the man who would not make God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches. But I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the steadfast love of the Lord forever and ever.'" And somewhere, perhaps beyond the veil of time and shame, the watcher who spoke too soon found the one truth he could never twist. That mercy, once it finds a willing heart, always has the last word, the end.